I want you to open your mind to the idea that what you think you should be seeking as a freshman elite college student or as a recently tenured professor is not what you should actually be seeking in college. As a freshman elite college student, you might think that you should be getting good grades for a good career, building great friendships, pursuing clubs, finding yourself, pursuing happiness. And as a recently tenured professor, you might think you should be mentoring students, teaching effectively, doing research. I want you to ask yourself, really ask yourself, what if everything that you've been seeking in college is not what you should be seeking? Right now, you have the greatest opportunity as a freshman college student to pursue something. In college, you have 4 years to devote to building yourself outside of having to focus on normal adult responsibilities. And if you don't leverage what you should be doing in college while doing that, it's like setting out on a hike without a water bottle and without a compass. Why now should we be asking this? Because the US educational system is being most questioned out of any time as the internet and AI become more prevalent, and the MAGA movement continues to question whether education is even that valuable. This is the best opportunity that we have to ensure that we really show the power of education, the power that I know you know is in education. Because it's not your fault. It's neither the student's fault or the professor's fault for what the educational system is like right now. We are using a foundation which came from the Industrial Revolution, where we pump out students like factory workers instead of teaching them the true things that will let them thrive in the modern world. If you're watching this video, I know you're not the typical student, not the typical professor. You're probably trying to navigate this system in your own individual ways. And that's what I'm trying to do with this video, is help you see all the ways that we've been trapped inside of the system that we have. You might be asking, why am I the one to tell you this? I'm not a professor. I bring the unique perspective of an Ivy League Cornell student graduate who graduated this last spring. So I am intimately aware of all of the problems with college from the student perspective. Even so, I've done a lot of teaching in my life. I've launched a quest after my disappointment with the Ivy League system in order to figure out what effective learning, teaching, and human thriving looks like. And in order to do that, I've talked to an audience of 10,000 plus online through 4 video courses and 5 years of YouTube, podcasting, and blogging. Offline, I've taught hundreds of students, college and high school, and even adults in my physical Cornell outdoor education courses and some of my education courses at Cornell. I've also taught a lot of people in my work at the Octalysis Group, where I'm a consultant and a gamification designer. And a lot of my work there is in teaching people about the principles of behavioral science in order to make important things more enjoyable and enjoyable things more productive. So I have a lot of teaching experience. One place I don't have as much teaching experience, ironically, is in the college classroom. But if you open your mind and let a student perspective give you some ideas on what it is that I've learned over the past few years teaching and being a student and talking to hundreds of freshman elite college students, as well as tens and tens of professors about their joys, struggles, and aspirations in education, I think you'll get a lot of value out of this video. This video is highly aspirational. This vision for college is not what I see college being in the next year or the next 5 or even the next 50, maybe even 200. This video is meant to pop you out of the bubble of what you think a college education is about, so that we might be able to build towards that vision in the long, long future. So if some of the stuff I say seems a little impractical, know that that is by design. And don't question its impracticality in the current system. Don't use that as a reason for the idea not being valuable over the long term. You should also know I'm speaking mostly to elite liberal arts colleges, not trade schools with a more explicit career pipeline. That's because, from my perspective, the most valuable people in the coming decades will be general specialists as the internet and AI become more and more prevalent. It's the people that have a wide understanding of many different areas with a specialization in a few that will dominate the world. Hopefully for good. So all of the ideas that I am bringing are oriented towards creating that general specialization. And the reason I target elite college students is not because I'm some elitist, oh, we should only be targeting the elite colleges and not the poor dregs of society, all the community colleges and the whatnots, the state schools. No. The reason is because the elite colleges have the most influence in sparking change in the other colleges. And also, I came and studied for 4 years in elite college, so I have the most understanding of the student and professor perspective from elite colleges. Hilariously, this is the only place you'll hear me talk positively about trickle-down economics in that sense. So with that being said, I want to first focus, before getting into the 10 principles of what you should really be seeking in a college education, on what freshman elite college students are seeking right now, because I've talked to hundreds and I've written down some of the major themes. So here are some direct quotes from some of the conversations I've had. See if you can peg where you sit if you're a student on these quotes. The people are the best part of college so far. Making friends is awesome. Love marching band and sense of community. Love meeting people who are diverse and accepting. Love living together in dorms with people. Love the freedom of living on my own. Great how many endless things to do for fun. Fun going on side quests like getting s'mores and experiencing drumming. Love exploring different dining halls. Love waking up early and seeing campus empty. I'm actually here. And here are some things freshmen struggle with. Struggling to study for prelims and managing time. Time management is hard. Difficult workload. Should have researched more about expectations beforehand. Choosing what to do isn't hard. It's feeling overwhelmed from all the things to do. If I solved these problems, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. There would be too much time. I'm scared of failing if I exit out of my bubble. Classes are really hard. Other people already way farther ahead than us with AP Physics. Feels like others are smarter than me. I'm struggling with competitive club culture. Club applications are more competitive than getting into an elite college. I didn't even know what a coffee chat was before coming to college. Struggle making lasting connections. Nobody's talking to each other. Struggle with social drama. Whole male friend group fighting over them. Would make her calmer if not stressed about schedule. Starting off behind is hard, knowing there's always more to do afterward. Would feel happy if completed goals, but I know there'd always be more. I don't want to make it sound like all these joys and these struggles that I've just mentioned are pointless endeavors. These are what you are probably focusing on in college. What I hope to do with this video is illuminate how some of the things that were just talked about above they don't get at the root of what you should really be seeking in college. And for professors, if these students are seeking the things that I just mentioned, this doesn't get at the root of what I think they should really be seeking. So, with that being said, let's dive into 10 principles which are what you should really be seeking for in college. This is the gold. This is what I could sell as a $1,000 course, but I am giving for free because I believe that much in the power of what it is that I'm about to tell you. So put your thinking cap on and let's jump in. All right, let's get into it. Number one principle for what you should really be seeking in college. I am really excited because I have thought so much about this. And this is the most important principle. So we're going to be spending a lot of time specifically on this one. Are you ready? All right, let's do it. The number one thing that you should be seeking in college is raising your knowledge, love, and consciousness. In essence, practicing spirituality. Right now, a lot of the elite college system is oriented around grades, traditional careers, transferring knowledge, and research. And all of those are to some degree important. It's really hard to practice spirituality when you don't have your survival needs met. Imagine trying to tell someone who doesn't even have financial security that they should be focusing on loving more. It's a hard sell. But that doesn't mean that we can't start pursuing spirituality in college. Unlike Maslow's hierarchy can sometimes make out, you don't need to fulfill all your survival needs before starting to work on the higher levels. And what do I mean by spirituality? Well, to me, spirituality is just the art of raising love, knowledge, and consciousness. I don't mean religious spirituality, although that is a form of spirituality and one that I deeply respect. I have a lot of religious friends. But I'm specifically talking about a secular spirituality, although you can, as a religious person, integrate all of the things I say in this video. You will run into some parts where you might see our worldviews collide. And I would encourage you to contemplate on why they're colliding and what that speaks about your religion. So let's start with knowledge. You may think this is obvious. Aiden, of course we're teaching knowledge in college. I mean, that's the whole point. I want you to look deeper than that. You're a more critical thinker than this. Ask yourself two questions. Number one, what do you know? Come on, do it. I'm serious. Go ahead and get a pen and pad and then start writing about this question. 5 years from now, you're going to see this video and when you journal about this question as the start of the most profound journey that you've ever gone on. Okay. I'm going to trust that you got a pen and paper out and started writing about that. Second question. How do you know that? All right, I'm going to trust that you've journaled about both of those questions. Now let me tell you about some of the things that might have come up for you as you were journaling about that. What do you know? Probably know about science, religion, learn them in your science textbook, talking to people about their religions, your parents telling you things, your professors telling you things, your friends telling you things, life experience, which fundamentally makes up a small part of life, your life, and that one short form YouTuber with based opinions. You know the one. I could go on and on and on about all the ways that you know things. But I want you to see the root pattern underlying all of these things that you know and how you know them. You can contemplate what that pattern is for a bit, but I'm going to tell you now. I know, I'm so nice. The pattern is that none of it you came up with yourself. Even the stuff that you did come up with yourself was profoundly affected by all the socialization and things that you were already told. I want you to open your mind to the idea that there are actually 3 ways of knowing, according to a model which I created, spiral knowing. And yes, I did name my own theory, because if academia can name things like quantum chromodynamic topology, then I can name my spiral. So don't get mad at me. Anyways, this theory of knowing is going to blow your mind. All right, so let me give you a very short description of it, because I will create a whole video about it, but I'm just going to start with the very basics so that I can open your mind to knowledge in college. Knowledge in college. That sounds kind of cool. So, spiral knowing is made up of 3 bands, and bands are made up of arcs. There's 8 arcs in total. The first band is propositional knowing. This is knowing about things. It's structured by practical knowing, and it's founded in participatory knowing and expressed in statements. Some examples would be World War II occurred from 1939 to 1945. Step 1 of the Krebs cycle includes construal in social psych means. Verbs that build propositional knowing are arcs 1 and 2 of spiral knowing. Arc 1 is remembering, and arc 2 is understanding. These both build propositional knowing. If you're doing these verbs, you're building propositional knowing. The second band, which is made up of 3 arcs, is practical knowing. This is knowing how to apply, analyze, evaluate something, whether kinesthetic or mental, as well as discerning between things based on relative evaluation. This band is expressed by propositional knowing and founded in the third band, participatory knowing. This knowing is often tacit, meaning it's hard to explain verbally, but it's evident in action. Some examples are comparing different organelles in a cell, defending the Communist Manifesto, engaging in effective group work, swimming, riding a bicycle. Some verbs for practical knowing, which are arcs 3 through 5. Arc 3 is applying, arc 4 is analyzing, and arc 5 is evaluating. Finally, band 3, we have participatory knowing. This is knowing how to be, not only in one context, but in your life as a whole. This band is structured by practical knowing and again expressed by propositional knowing, but founded in itself. That makes participatory knowing the deepest out of all the bands. Verbs in this band are characterized by how they change your very participation with knowing and relation to self and other. That's why it's called participatory knowing. So some examples would be experiencing Cornell from the relationship of a person in the LGBTQ plus community. Could be journaling about the quality of one's friendships in college. It could mean becoming a mechanical engineer. I don't mean becoming a mechanical engineer in the sense that you get the degree of a mechanical engineer. I literally mean you become a mechanical engineer to the very way that you relate to the world, the agent-arena relationship that you have. Notice how much deeper that is. The way you participate in the world is fundamentally different. And you cannot get that with a degree. It needs to become from the very being mode. Some verbs for building participatory knowing, which are arc 6 through 8. Arc 6 is creating. Arc 7 is inquiring. And arc 8 is experiencing. Now, that was 5% of what spiral knowing is. Actually probably more like 1%. So in order to describe more what it is, I would need so much more time. But just with that little foundation, we can look at how knowledge in college I'm going to say that for the rest of the video. I'm so sorry. We can look at how knowledge in college is problematic right now. Much of elite college education is about band 1 and a little into band 2. So there's a lot of emphasis on remembering, understanding, application, and a bit of analysis. I'm not saying that you as a professor or you as a student fall 100% into that. In fact, because you're watching this video, you're probably a little deeper. But generally, that's the groundedness norm. And that's a problem because those bands barely scratch the surface of the deepest forms of knowing. Why? Because band 1 and the beginning of band 2 are mostly socialized learning. Remember the 2 questions that you answered beforehand? Most of these bands are not getting at the root of what knowing is. You're just taking what other people are telling you and applying it. Remember, band 1, remembering and understanding. There's nothing about questioning the very essence of how you know things in that. And then the beginning of band 2, applying and analyzing. Applying is just applying what you've already been told. Analyzing, you're beginning to connect and discern between different things. Like if you're a little bit more of an exploratory student or teacher and you connect learnings from one course to another, now you're getting a little bit deeper in your forms of knowing. But it's only at evaluating in the end of band 2 when we start to question the very knowledge or rules that we have been given. And notice how this is rarely taught in college. At least for me, I rarely was asked to do this. And if I was asked to do it, there's a very key difference here. I was not asked to do it from participatory knowing level. I was asked to do it from the practical knowing level. What I mean by that is in the participatory knowing, that's where you start to question the very relationship with which you are coming to the world in, right? You literally question if the way that you are evaluating, the way that you're applying, the way that you're analyzing is even as you should be doing it. And if the way that other people are doing it is as they should be doing it. You're getting into metaphysics. You're getting into the grounding of reality and the very way that you come to knowledge itself. The upper levels of band 2 and band 3 are where the deepest forms of knowing come from. Really, in band 3 is where we start to get to some incredible forms of knowing. When you are creating things new out of the stuff that you've learned, not only are you integrating all of the previous levels, but you are participating in a new relationship with reality because you are creating something that didn't exist beforehand. In the inquiring arc, that's when you're starting to question your self-deceptions. You're questioning the very structure of your relationship with reality. You're journaling, you're contemplating, you're meditating, you're inquiring about if you've socialization, which you had in college, is wrong. And when I say socialization, I don't just mean socialization from friends, from religion. I mean science too. Like, don't get me wrong. I love science. I love religion. There's also a lot of problems if we teach them in a way where they aren't questioned. You might think, well, of course science is questioned. That's the whole point of science. But what if the very grounding of science, the way that we do it, what if that needs to be questioned too? because you can't use science to validate science. That's circular logic. I want you to see how there might be something deeper, a deeper way of knowing outside of science and religion. And that's where we get to arc 8, which is experiencing, the deepest form of knowing possible. This is some other verbs that you might know in this stage: presencing, attuning, witnessing. These are all relating. These are all at the very ground of knowing itself, because they are at the deepest root of knowing, which, as we'll talk time and time again in this video, is simply consciousness. The deepest form of knowing is simply directly experiencing what is. Because that's all there is what you are experiencing right now. Me pointing a finger at you and trying to take you by the shoulders and shake you. Wake up! Wake up! You're in the Matrix! Consciousness. This is the most important thing that you'll ever learn in your life. And that might seem pretentious, that might seem egotistical, I know. But it's true. There is nothing but consciousness. And until you start seeking the degree of profundity at which that exists in your college education, you won't see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Another thing that is problematic about the way that knowledge is taught in college is often not deeply connected. Now, admittingly, I did have a few classes that did this. My Better Decisions class connected biology and psychology and sociology. And my Psych 6 Pretty Good Books class also connected sociology and psychology. I was a psych major. But there's so much more that we can go, because everything ultimately at the very root of reality is connected. And the reason for that, and I can't argue this in this video, it would be way too long, but reality is fundamentally infinite. And in order to experience anything, we need to create dualistic bounds on reality. Finite structures like, I like this environmental club a lot. Notice how relative that is. And here we get to an additional thing in spiral knowing, which is difference between relative and absolute truth. Relative truth is any dualistic construction in consciousness. So I like this environmental club a lot. How is that relative? Well, you're using the English language to describe this. So that is already profoundly relative, because anyone who doesn't speak that language is going to have no idea what you're saying. Environmental. What does environmental mean? Does it mean the environment outdoors? Could your indoor office environment count as environment? Does it mean the universe? That's technically environment, right? Or is it just your country? Or is it the world at large? What about club? What is a club? Is it a club if it's only 3 people in the club? Does it have to be 10 people at least? Does it have to be run by a student, multiple students? What if it's run by a professor? Is it still a club then? You see what I'm getting at here? And then there's the I like. Well, what if someone doesn't like the environmental club? What if they think it's awful? Hopefully they don't tell it to the person's face, but you see how relative that is, right? Now that's easy to see the relativeness. All right. You can also see it in I like discussions more than lecture. Well, what is a discussion? What is a lecture? Can you have both at the same time? If you have both at the same time, is it called a lecture or is it called a discussion? I like discussions or lecture. Like why? Do you like them because they're easy? Because they're also very relative. It depends on where you grew up, what you value. It depends what your values are. You might change to resonate with American values more, even if you're Asian American, after you come to America. It's also very relative. Now, let's get a little deeper. All right, I want you to really open your mind to this next thing I say, because it's a little insane. on the surface level, as profound things often are. This relative truth goes really, really, really far. Here's a statement that'll blow your mind because it's relative. We're made of atoms. Well, you say, Aiden, of course we're made of atoms. Science proves it. Yes, science does hypothesize it. Yeah, I would even say it's a valid theory that we are made of atoms. Right? That is one of the great things about science is it can create these truths that are falsifiable that for everyone so far that we've checked, it does seem like we're made of atoms. Yes. I love science. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have those truths or that we shouldn't believe that we're made of atoms. But on an objective sense, on the very highest level, relatively, we should believe that we're made of atoms. But there's nothing in the universe that says we have to be made of atoms, right? Atom itself is a word that we made up to describe what atoms are. It might be called something different in another culture. Sure, if we look in a microscope, we can see that we're made of atoms on a very, 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 very small level. But have you actually seen an atom from the atom level? Have you even seen it? You probably haven't even seen an atom because you're not a scientist, unless you've actually done some experiments. What if we were a different being, if we had a different relationship with the world, like a four-dimensional being? I don't know. What if reality wasn't made of atoms? What if it was made of bananas? Now, I'm not saying that in like 100% truth that we should think, oh my God, reality is made of bananas from this relative perspective. But I want to really get you to see the truth that on the most objective sense, there is nothing in the universe that says we have to be made of atoms. And according to scientific theory, if we came up with enough experiments that showed at some point that reality actually was not made of atoms, it was made of something else, you would have to accept that. If you're being an honest scientist, of course. Which means, and this has happened many, many times throughout science's history. So we've thought one thing, we thought it with Newton's laws of motion, and then general relativity came in and was like, boom, thwacked. And then quantum mechanics came in to general relativity and was like, boom, take that. Now we're trying to coalesce those two. So what I'm saying is actually not that radical if you just look at it a little bit deeper. So what I'm trying to point you to is the relative truth underlying everything that you know. And notice how you have never, ever been told this in your college education. At least I was never told it. And that's because if you knew it, if you knew everything that they told you was relative, the bubbles popped. What do you do now? Now you have to take the responsibility of genuinely questioning everything that you've been told, not just in your college education, everything your friends have told you, everything your parents have told you, everything society has told you, everything needs to be questioned. And that is really, really hard. Man, is that hard. Now, I would allude to you what absolute truth is, because it does exist. I've seen it myself on psychedelic trips. But I can't tell you about it. It would take way longer to talk about this in video than we have time for. And ultimately, you just have to experience it. So I'll record another video on that. But trust me, for now, it exists. It's not all relative, thankfully. God, thankfully. What I want you to take away from this is that what you should really be seeking in college, in regards to knowledge in college, is developing the meta-learning habits that help you build knowledge. Because if you can learn how to learn, you can also learn how to pretend that you've learned. I'm joking. We want you to develop real knowledge. So that basically means going deeper in spiral knowing, right? Not just existing in band 1 and the shallow parts of band 2, going to the deepest level. to band 3 and grounding yourself in there rather than grounding yourself at band 2. Why? Because otherwise, everything that you do in your life is based on falsehood. When you're operating with good intentions on falsehood, you can do evil. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Don't be the person that thinks that what they know is truth. Just because someone else said it, just because your professor said it, because your friend said it, because your class believes it as a whole. You think your bubble of reality is the only one. Not saying you 100% think this. I'm just saying that you might think this. You think your bubble of reality is the only one. And what I'm asking you to do is take a little pin and just burst it. Now, do not fall into the relativism trap when you do this, because there is a big danger that you can take where as soon as you realize, oh my God, everything is false, you have no grounding anymore in anything. That is also a trap, because while on the objective sense, there is absolute truth, but there's the relative truths that you have are not absolutely true. It's true. That doesn't mean that from your relative human perspective, there are not certain ideas, certain beliefs, certain habits, certain whatevers that will not lead to higher levels of love, of consciousness, and of knowledge for not only humanity, but the universe as a whole. So don't fall into that trap. And the last thing I'll say is that the people who change the world the most, they are the general specialists. They are the ones that have really gone into the deeper levels of spiral knowing, because they have a different relationship with the world. Even the scientifically minded people who you might think have spent a lot of time in band 1 and 2, they've also spent time in band 3. Einstein, he was a musician, deeply intuitive guy. A lot of the ideas that he came to, he didn't come to by logically reasoning them out. He intuited them because of his relationship with the world from the band 3 knowing that he developed. Leonardo da Vinci, very connected knowledge base. You look in his commonplace book when he was writing, he would often have on the same page bizarrely intermixed disciplines of thought. He would have the schematics for a crossbow alongside a poetic description of a river flowing, and then the anatomy of a human arm, all on the same page. These people were deeply connected in their knowing, and that's one of the reasons they were able to do such a profound amount in their life. So, now that we've looked at knowledge in college, let's move on to the second part of the first golden principle for what you should really be seeking in college. I'm realizing this video is probably going to be a lot longer than I was expecting, and we'll probably need a second part. All right. Number 2 out of the 3 things in principle number 1, another golden aspect of what you should really be seeking in college: love. I know that sounds very airy-fairy, but I'm not talking about love as a feeling, as a lot of our culture has made it out to be. I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean the pleasurable feeling of being with someone that you care about. I don't mean the want to take care of something. I don't mean the want to get gifts for someone that you care about. I don't even mean spending time or commitment to someone that you care about. I'm taking love to the very deepest level, to the metaphysical level. Love with a capital L. That is what we should be building in college. In order to understand what that is, seeing love not as a feeling, but as an existential relationship that you have with reality. Let me give you a metaphor. I think you'll find this really, really cool. I like this metaphor because I did make it. So, so I want you to imagine that you are a painter with a canvas. As you're painting this canvas, you have a certain degree of colors that you can use. For me, those colors are blue and green because those are my favorite colors. I have a green ring and a blue ring. So those are my colors. You can ask yourself what your colors would be. Point is, you're painting this canvas. Every other person, every other thing that is in reality, painting its own canvas with its own colors. What it means to love something is to give your paint, to be in such a relationship with it that you give your paint to them and then they give some of their paint back. Now, not only are you able to see yourself on a more profound level, to see deeper into reality with more consciousness, because you have more colors, you can also see deeper into the other person through you because they're using some of their paint and they can see deeper into themselves as well. That is love with a capital L. Now, what does that look like? One of the things that looks like is expanding your sphere of concern. When we come into college, we all have various spheres of concern, which, funnily enough, map pretty well to your political orientation as well, but that's another video. Most of you, since you're at an elite college institution, your sphere of concern probably could be outside of this, but it's probably your country and some of the surrounding oppressed places in the world, but not the quote-unquote evil people, right? Maybe it also includes those people. Maybe it even includes animals if you're vegan like I am. But that's probably what your sphere of concern is. Building love is building that sphere of concern deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, wider and wider and wider. So you're not just focusing on your country, or your tribe, or your family. You're focusing on loving everything. The universe as a whole, all of it is being loved by you. And that is a profound state to be in. Wanting not only to grow your own conscious awareness and ability to love, but also the entire universe's conscious awareness and ability to love over the long term. It's radical, I know, but that is what love with a capital L is. Love is also wanting to grow something's conscious and ability to love and knowledge over the long term while respecting their sovereignty as an individual thing. This is something I have struggled with sometimes, is you, and you've probably felt it as well, you want so badly for someone to see how they're deceiving themselves. You want to take them by the shoulders and just shake them. Oh, see it, see it, see it. And yet, because you're not them, you can't get them to see it. And a part of love is being able to adapt to the thing that you are loving in order to grow them over the long term, which might mean not doing what you want to do in the moment. It also means not projecting what you think living a good life is onto them. Right? There's a difference between lowercase judgment and uppercase judgment, which maps well onto love here. Lowercase judgment is wanting things to be differently than what they are and projecting your own belief about what that looks like onto the thing, not respecting its sovereignty. Uppercase judgment is wanting something to be different than what it is and not projecting your own belief over what that looks like onto the thing, respecting the sovereignty of the individual. That is really hard to do. But that is what capital L, love, is. And the last really essential aspect of what love looks like is ultimately overcoming what is love's opposite, which is fear. I don't mean fear in the physical sense. That's a part of fear. Like, if you see a car barreling at you on the road when you're jaywalking at Cornell, couldn't be me, definitely not. And getting a fear reaction and jumping out of the way so that you don't get run over. Right? That's an aspect of fear, yes. I mean fear on a more metaphysical sense. Fear in changing from the identity which you believe you are. Right, now stay with me here. What I mean by that, we do not die in a physical sense. We die in a psychological one. That might sound very trippy, but contemplate with me here. Really dig into the truth of that statement. And if you end up finding that it's wrong, right? Accept it's wrong. I'm not trying to preach ideology here, but really ask yourself what it means to die. And you will see, I think, if you contemplate enough, that you only die on the mental plane, right? Because let's say that you were in the hospital, your heart was still beating, your brain was still working, but you're in a coma. Nothing is going on in the head. Yeah, physically you're not dead, but in all respective accounts for you, you're dead because there's no mental experience going on. Now I want you to take that metaphor and apply it to everything in your life regarding identity. You are constantly trying to survive the identity which you have created for yourself. What identity? For you, if you're a student, it might be the identity that you're an achiever. You explore a lot of things outside of your comfort zone. You're a double major. You connect different learnings together. You value relationships, but you also want good grades so you can get a good career. Might be the opposite end of the spectrum. Maybe you're a student that doesn't explore as much. You like structure more. You're in a more STEM field, which isn't to say you can't explore in STEM fields. It's just to say in this tends to be the case. If you're in a STEM field, you explore a little less, just generally. And you're fearful of stepping out of your comfort zone. You're valuing of intimate connections, but not a huge social group. You're constantly trying to survive these identities because if you changed, that identity would die. That psychological identity would die. As a professor, you might be very into teaching, into mentoring students, into research potentially as well. You might be a humanities professor and you really like writing books and talking at conferences about your research. You might be a STEM professor. You really value bettering your lab, mentoring students, mentoring postdocs, getting better equipment for your lab, bettering science over term. Like these seem like good values. Like Aiden, why would you talk about them in a negative light? I'm not talking about them in a negative light. I'm saying you are surviving this identity. If you stopped surviving this identity, you would die. You would be a different identity. And so a part of love is overcoming the fear in wanting to survive the identity that you believe you are. Now, it doesn't mean that you get rid of all fears on a relative sense. That's impossible because you know what would happen if you got rid of all fear? Really want to know? You would die because you wouldn't care if you survived or not. There would be no fear of not eating, of not drinking water, and you would die. So I'm not saying get rid of all your fears unless you just really aspire to be the most enlightened person you could possibly be. That's not practical. What you can work on doing if you want to love more is getting rid of the clinging, the attachment to this identity that you believe you are, and all the micro and macro fears that you experience on your day-to-day, because there's a lot. Trust me, I know there's a lot because I analyze myself and all the micro and macro fears I have, and there is so many. You can work on being able to notice those fears when they come up. And I can't go into all the ways you can change that right now because that would be another video in itself, but you can overcome a lot of your fear until you are living almost all of your life rooted in love. That is a beautiful state to be in. Been in it a number of times myself, but again, it's just a state. Imagine if that was your way of being, always, almost always. That would be profound. What are some qualities of love? Now that we've talked about some principles, making them. One of them is selflessness, expanding your sphere of concern to not just include yourself. Respect, respecting another person, even if they don't value or agree with the same things you are. Respecting their sovereignty as an individual. Understanding someone's goals, values, beliefs. How much do you know about your friend's goals, values, and beliefs? Kind yet stern when necessary. You can balance both the masculine and feminine love. Masculine love and telling someone what they need to hear when they need to hear it, and feminine love in giving them the kindness and sympathy and forgiveness, right? Being able to do both of those. Neither one is right, neither one's wrong. Both necessary. Taking their wins and goals as their own. It's not just something that you hear them say, it's something you actively work to help them with. And here's a big kicker, letting them surpass you. This is something I particularly felt with my brother for a lot of my life, because I think to some degree in our relationship, he's felt like I shouldn't word it that way. I have worked towards being the best version of myself, and sometimes I've let that get in the way of loving him as I truly should and bringing him up because of my own ego. Now, thankfully, I've let a lot of that go at this point, but I was living a lot more in fear back then when I was still doing that. Letting them influence you. To love someone deeply, if they ask you to change, you genuinely ask if you should change for them. Because you love them so much. Listen to what I'm saying. You love them so much, you will die for them. Not physically, you will die on an identity level. That's how much you love them. Assuming good intentions until they're broken. Truly love someone, you will always assume that if they've done something that's wronged you, they did it out of good intention, unless they break it enough times. And then you can start to question that, but that's what you do if you truly love someone. Understanding you would do the same in their situation. This gets at a whole nother video topic about free will and whatnot. But if you were in the same situation, you truly love someone, you would have done the exact same thing that they did. And the degree of forgiveness and love that emanates when you realize that, not just on a conceptual level, but on a being level, is incredible. Sometimes love is giving someone your paint, from the paint metaphor before, and not asking for anything in return. This is called, in Greek, there are 3 different types of love that they sometimes talked about. And this is agapic love. This is the love of becoming. The love of helping someone become into them without expecting anything back. And this is the classic love that a parent has for their child, because they're not going to give anything back to you. They'll give you good experiences, and they might get excited when you're home, but they're not going to do all these other forms of love that we're talking about. And so that is a special form of love that you're building there, and will emanate into the other areas of your life, not just in your parents' parenting, but you can use that love everywhere. It'll make a lot of your relationships much stronger when you're not expecting relationships to be 50-50. or even 60-40, that's hard to do. Loving them for who they are, not who you want them to be. It's like going through this list is just a diary of everything that I've struggled with in my life. I am this one intimately I feel with, because once you're as realized as I am, and I don't mean that in an egotistical sense, I just mean that as a straight fact. I sometimes have struggled so much with seeing where someone could be, the beauty in how great of a person they could be, and not being able to just skyrocket them there right away. Knowing that if I told them what I think they should be doing in order to do that, and I disrespected their sovereignty, it would actually hurt their growth in the long term. And maybe what I think that they should be doing is not what they should be doing. I'm not them. Man, that's been hard. It's been really hard to get over. But that's love. Love means loving the person for who they are, not who you want them to be. Love means allowing some suffering, but wanting to lessen someone's suffering in the long term. You know that some suffering is necessary for the person to grow into who they are. You don't helicopter parent them. You don't tell them just what they want to hear when they want to hear it. You give them the hard truth when they need to hear it, if they're ready. And you know that the short-term relationship hurt that comes from that is nothing compared to the long-term power in a relationship where you both know that you will do that for each other. That's love. Giving time, attention, and awareness. Time is the one resource that is completely scarce for everyone. And even when you give them your time, it probably might not be giving them your attention. Imagine, especially with students nowadays, always being on their phones and being distracted by homework. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing homework, but ask yourself, are you giving your friends the most profound time, attention, and awareness you can be? At least sometimes, not all the time. Are you doing that? And your professor friends, if you're a professor, giving them your profoundest time, attention, and awareness. Loving them enough to let them go when it will help them in the long run is also really hard for me. Sometimes, if you love someone enough, you realize that you're not right for each other. And staying in the relationship, this particularly resonate, I think, with my female audience, because often struggle much more with feeling bad for breaking up with someone that you know you shouldn't be with. Whereas with a male audience, it's much more about, often in general, of course, there's exceptions. It's much more, should I even commit to this person in the first place? You need to be able, if you truly love that person, to stop being so selfish and realize that not being with them is actually going to help their growth in the long term. And also going to help you, because it doesn't just affect you when you're in a bad relationship. It affects everyone that you interact with. You need to have enough love to see that. The last quality of love is following upaya while interacting with them. This is a Buddhist term, means skillful, means adapting what you say, how you say it, when you say it, where you say it, why you say it, to the person that you're interacting with. Knowing that you might have this grand vision for what their life could be like, and all of these profound truths about the world, but they might not be ready. Loving them means accepting that. Some questions that I want you to reflect on based off of this. What if college was all about growing your ability to love? Imagine that. Imagine how different college would be if that was what it was about. What would it look like to love your fellow students like they were your own family, your own children? I don't mean literally treat them like they were your children, because that's impossible to do with every single one, but just imagine, even for a few seconds, what having that relationship with your fellow students would be like. How that would make you act differently around them. And if you're a professor, imagine what it would be like if you treated your students that you're teaching like they were your own children, like they were your family. Just for a few seconds, imagine the relationship, how that would make you think, act differently about your teaching and research. And what does love mean that you have to love? It means that you love the elitist professor who gives you a bad grade. You love the conservative who misgenders you. You love the student who interrupts during class. You love the students who are perpetually bored in your class, like they're watching a Windows update screen. And perhaps hardest of all, it means you love yourself. Every single flaw that you have, your imposter syndrome, your overwhelm, your burnout, your relationship struggles, your time management struggles, purpose struggles, everything. Ultimately, if you take this love to the very deepest level, you will have to love even Hitler. And if that gives you an emotional reaction, I encourage you to reflect on why that is. Because from an objective sense, there is nothing good, there is nothing bad about Hitler. Dramatic light fall to emphasize the point. I'll set that up again in a bit. Only on the relativistic human level is there anything good or bad about Hitler. Yes, from a relative level, I don't condone his actions. I'm literally Jewish. But from an objective sense, which is what you're striving for when you're loving on the most deep level, you have to love even him. Loving something doesn't mean you're okay with whatever they do, because that's not respecting all spheres of being. Your tribe, your country, the world, the universe. Sometimes loving something can actually mean trying to hurt that thing. Because with Hitler, for example, loving him by not stopping what he's doing would have meant not loving the entire world and all the Jews that were harmed during that sphere of time. And so sometimes loving something means hurting it, because they are hurting a greater amount of spheres of love. And if you truly love on the deepest level, you love all those spheres, which is why you couldn't accept that. So love is powerful. And with that being said, we can move on to the third part of the first principle of what freshman college students should really be seeking in college. All right, part 3 of the first principle of what you should really be seeking in college. The reason we're spending so much time here is because this first principle really is the root of everything that you should be seeking in college. All the other principles connect to this one in some way. Even the ones in here connect to each other. So that's why we're spending so much time on it. That being said, the third thing that you should be doing in the first principle of seeking, what you should really be seeking in college, is building your consciousness. Now, I don't mean scientific consciousness theories, or whether you're physically awake, like whether you're sleeping or whether you're going about your everyday. I mean the root of reality itself. Direct, conscious experience. What you are doing right now as you're listening to me, looking at my fingers move across the screen, consciousness. How aware are you? I want you to actually ask that question right now with the pen and pad that we had earlier. How aware are you? Assume that you spent the time doing that. Now I'm going to give you a metaphor to help build your awareness around what I mean by how aware are you. Let's imagine that your conscious awareness is like watching a movie. You're in the movie theater of your mind. This movie is really good, way better than most other movies. Most movies just have sight and they have sound. That's it. This movie that you are at has sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. And whatever other weird senses that we might have, like your sense of being able to feel what you have. Not really a traditional one of the five senses, but has all of it. This movie is so good that just like when you're watching a normal movie that's really good, just with sight and just with sound, you completely get absorbed in it. Absolutely and utterly unaware that you are watching a movie. You are the movie. And it's not even a good movie. It's Cars 2. Jokes aside, the reason I bring up this metaphor, that many students and professors, not necessarily saying you're one of them, but many students and professors at elite colleges are completely unaware that they are watching a movie. The movie in the movie theater of their mind. They are operating entirely from survival. Remember what we said in love beforehand? Not physical survival, surviving their identity, surviving continuing to watch the movie, right? And why are they doing this? Because if they became aware that they were watching a movie, that it wasn't real, that it's all an illusion, they would need to die. Their identity would need to die. Let me give you some examples so it's more clear. Right? What identities might you be surviving? Might you be unaware that you are even surviving because you're lost in the movie? Doing multiple majors to survive the identity of being someone that explores a lot and an achiever. Refraining from stepping out of your comfort zone because you're scared of failure. Focusing more on lab or humanities research rather than teaching students, perhaps even the students in your research lab or your research group if you're a humanities professor. Focusing on helping students improve grades rather than on helping them build everything that we're talking about here. It doesn't just happen on the individual level, it happens on a collective level too. How aware is the collective ego of the college that you're at, of the friend group that you have, of the society that you're in? Right now, elite colleges only accept a minor few to survive the identity that they have in their collective ego of elitism. Businesses have a profit incentive to survive. If they didn't, they would die. If they aren't aware of what identity is surviving, absorbed in the movie of their mind. So now I have a question for you, which is, are you aware of the movie that you're watching? Are you living consciously or unconsciously? There's a huge difference, because I don't want you to think here that I'm saying if you're doing the traditional thing, like you're taking a traditional path into mechanical engineering or law or becoming a doctor, that you're not living consciously. Not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is anything that you do, even if you're not taking the traditional path, if you're not aware of why you're doing it and the identity that you're trying to survive, you're living unconsciously. So you can have someone who's going down a traditional career path, like becoming a doctor, a mechanical engineer, or a lawyer, and is super conscious. They know exactly why they're doing it on a metaphysical, deepest level. They're at the very deepest level of the spiral knowing. And paradoxically, you can have someone who's doing the most untraditional thing possible. They're going to Bali and becoming a laptop warrior, a digital nomad, and they are living entirely unconsciously. They're in the movie theater of their mind, and all their other friends are digital nomads, and they're all just boosting each other up to go on this life, and they don't even see that there is a movie that they could be watching, right? They're just shoveling popcorn into their mouth while they're watching it. So that's a good question to ask. Now, I really want to emphasize a point here, because it's very important that you see how deep this consciousness goes, right? Because you might say, well, Aiden, this sounds nice. You're aware of the identity that you're surviving. That's all cool and all. But, ultimately, I need to go into my classes tomorrow. I need to work on my tests. I need to see my friends. Why is this practical to me? What I'm saying right now, this literally is everything. Everything that you are experiencing is consciousness. Everything. It's consciousness all the way down. Have you ever heard the joke of, like, I can't remember what it was, but I think it was two philosophers were talking to each other, and one of them said, "What if the Earth is floating in space? What is the Earth floating on?" And then one of them says it's floating on a turtle, and the other philosopher says, "What's the turtle floating on?" And the first philosopher responds, "You don't understand. It's turtles all the way down." It's consciousness all the way down. Everything is consciousness. What I'm saying to you is you're experiencing in consciousness. The friends that you talk to after this video, they are in your consciousness. The grade that you see on the test that you take, that hopefully it says A+, but if it doesn't, the negative sensation that you feel when you see it's not A+, that's consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Understand the profundity with what I am saying here. There is nothing that you experience that isn't consciousness. You, and for all the religious people watching this, I don't want what I say next to come across as offensive. But at the same time, I know it's true. So I really want you to open your mind here and don't immediately assume the negative reaction you feel is true, because even that's happening in consciousness. You are God. You are God playing in the playground of your own mind. The only reason you don't realize you're God is because you have created a finite bound out of the infinite in order to even be able to experience anything, because by definition, if you didn't, you would be infinity, and infinity cannot experience itself because you need to have a relative thing to even experience an infinite, right? An infinite cannot experience infinite because there's no substance to which to compare itself to. And so you are God who has made itself finite in order to play in the playground of its own creation. And in order to emphasize this point, I want you to differentiate between self with a lowercase s and self with a capital S. Self with a lowercase s is the self that you think you are. This is all the values, the beliefs, the identities, the relationships, every relative truth that you have about yourself, others, the world, reality. That is not you. You are not that because that is constantly changing. As we said, your identity is constantly in flux. Even from 3 seconds ago, based off of the new words that I said, if you want to go from a scientific minded view, new neurotransmitters have gone throughout your body. Your cells have changed a little. Some of them have died. None of the cells that you have right now are the same cells that you had a decade ago. The ship of Theseus, if you like that metaphor, every single board in your body has been replaced. You're no longer the original ship. Your self is completely different. What remains is self with a capital S. This is the awareness that sits behind everything, the conscious awareness. The thing that, as I am describing what I am describing to you, is aware of what I'm describing and sees all of the sensations coming up in your body. This is the thing watching the movie that needs to realize that it doesn't have to be absorbed in the movie, that it can awaken to the fact that it is watching a movie. That is the self with a capital S. Ultimately, it's God. Why is this important? Because if you don't take conscious control of your life, you will spend your entire life living someone else's dreams. You will get absorbed in their movie without being aware at the movie that you are absorbed in. This might lead you to do some things that you ultimately see as evil looking back when you become more conscious, right? And it means that hating others means hating yourself, because ultimately everything is in your conscious. All the reactions that you have to things in your consciousness are relative. There's nothing objective about it. The only thing objective about consciousness is that consciousness is happening. So hating others is hating yourself. This goes back to what we were saying about love, which is why ultimately the ultimate truth is just love everything. That's really hard to do. Means when you realize the profundity of how consciousness is everything, you have to take radical responsibility for everything, because your relationship to that thing is you. It is literally you. It's in your consciousness. That is everything. And so you no longer can say, this person's doing bad, this system sucks, climate change is going to ruin the world, and just sit back and do nothing about it, because that's you. When you reject anything in your conscious experience, you are rejecting yourself. And taking radical responsibility means accepting everything that comes into consciousness. Not in the sense that you don't do anything about it, but in the sense that you realize that that is you. And you might be able to work towards making your consciousness and other people's consciousness, which is still in your consciousness, more loving, more knowledgeable, more conscious. How many times can you say conscious? You take radical responsibility for that. Now, what does building consciousness mean? It means ultimately just building more awareness. And awareness, if you remember spiral knowing, is all about inquiry and experiencing. It means building awareness of emotional tendencies, of beliefs, of your socialization, of your values, of time allocation that you have and how it affects your energy, of metaphysics, of knowledge, of things to find beautiful in the world. Let me go through a list of verbs for inquiry and for experiencing that might help you get an understanding for what that actually looks like, what building awareness looks like. These are the deepest levels of spiral knowing. Arc 7 and Arc 8 in the participatory band. Inquiry. Surfacing self-deception. Contemplating. Going meta. Questioning. Wondering. Meditating. Journaling. Reflecting. Observing. Dialoguing. And then with experiencing. Perceiving affordances. This is an ecological psychology term. An affordance is simply an opportunity to act in a certain way. And notice that's a very relational thing. Your affordances come from your relationship to a thing. I have different affordances than you. You have different affordances than me. Direct experience. It would be too long to be able to say what direct experience really is. It has to do with absolute truth, but that is a part of experiencing. Presencing, relating, witnessing, undergoing, becoming, identifying, blending, intuiting, attuning, immersing, resonating, dissolving. All of these verbs are ways to come to the fundamental insight of just how much your consciousness is everything. And ultimately, if you don't do these verbs in college, you will live your life stuck in a movie which you don't even know you're watching. That's no way to live. Principle number 2, what you should really be seeking in college. Growing wisdom. Understand the profundity of this. I want to go through a thought experiment. Which of these people would you rather be? Person A, deeply intelligent, makes a lot of money, really great career, knowledgeable about their chosen field, incredible specialist, but they don't have that many friendships of character, people they really want to aspire to be like. They're not doing anything explicitly harmful with their career, but they're not doing anything explicitly that beneficial either. Pretty unbalanced life. Sometimes they drink a little too much. Sometimes they sleep a little too little. Sometimes they exercise, but not regularly. Nutrition is decent. Then we have person B. Not as intelligent in a traditional sense as person A. Not that knowledgeable about any one specific field. Decent knowledge in some, but more of a generalist than anything. They don't make that much money. Sometimes they have to ask their parents for money when they need it. They're doing something explicitly good with their career, though. It is making a positive change in humanity's love, knowledge, and consciousness. They have few friends, but the friends that they do have are genuine friendships of character. They make them aspire to become a better person. Pretty balanced life for the most part. They still have their vices, but they sleep enough. They eat healthily with the money that they have, exercise a decent amount. There's still things that could be improved, of course, but they're working on it. Which of these people would you rather be? Now, you might say, Aiden, of course I would be person B. It's not even a question. I trust that you genuinely do want to be person B. I think most people would like to think they'd like to be person B. Now let me ask you another question. Look at the actions that you're doing on your day-to-day. Which of those people are those actions helping you become? Because what you might find is that more of the actions you're doing are turning you into person A than into person B. And what is one of the fundamental differences between person A and person B? Person B has wisdom. What is wisdom? Well, on the one hand, it's that weird elective that you can take that nobody else wants to do because it's too hard. But on the other hand, wisdom is proper valuing, prioritizing, and acting from radical selflessness. And let's go through some qualities of wisdom, because we need to unpack that definition to really get it, how you can build it in college or teach it if you're a professor. So, one essential aspect of wisdom is balancing. And I want you to be careful that you don't think of balancing in this case as a scale with weights on either end, and balancing means getting it perfectly in center. That is not what I mean by balancing. By balancing, I mean understanding that life unfolds in seasons, and those seasons will have varying things that you prioritize and lean into. And balancing in this sense means not only being aware of what season your life is veering in, but being able to navigate with awareness how that is altering the other things that you value in life. In my memoir, I call this idea playing the infinite game. You can imagine there's a whole bunch of different games that we're playing in life, each with their own goals and rules and feedback systems and reasons for doing them. And the quintessential mistake that I have made over and over and over again in my life is I take one of the games out of the infinite that you could play, and then I optimize the crap out of it. I've done this with grades. I've done this with relationships. Most recently, I've done this with content creation. I've done this with focus. I've done this with spirituality. And balancing is being able to play the infinite game, to understand that even when you are focusing on one game, there are other games that you are still playing and could be playing, and being aware of how that is impacting them. Another aspect of wisdom is being highly contextual. Let me give you some, actually, before I give some examples, why is context important? Well, as we've explored, everything is relative, and therefore it is of utmost importance that with anything that you do in life, you do it with an understanding that it is relative to you. What are some examples of this? Well, what's wise as a freshman is not wise as a sophomore. Don't make the mistake and you'll be suffering. I'm sorry, one of my friends made that joke and I had to put it in. So, yeah. What's wise when you're a disadvantaged social identity is not wise when you're in an advantaged social identity. Unfortunately, with the way things are right now, if you are Black, you are more likely to get a ticket when you're pulled over, simply because you're Black. So it's probably less wise to break traffic laws or driving laws while you're driving. What's wise as a postdoc is not wise once you have tenure. All right? When you do things while as a postdoc without tenure, if you do something too risky, well, now you've lost tenure, and that's really bad for your career. But now when you have tenure, my dad likes to say, because he's a professor, you're indestructible. It doesn't mean you can do anything you want, of course, but you have much more ability to do things. The generality problem in science is a classic example of context. The fundamental difficulty with doing science is that we need to control for variables so that we don't have any confounds in a confined enough environment where we can study something purposely. The problem is that in most cases, that means we need to create an artificial environment rather than study what is. And so whenever you separate something from its context, and then you try and generalize the insight that you have about the confined context to the greater context, now we have a problem. Now, I'm not saying that science sucks because of this. Science is great. But great scientists are very receptive of the generality problem and do as much as they can to understand how they can create a scientific context that still generalizes out. Last example of context that I'll use, which you might be fundamentally aware of because you're in a university environment, is the naivety of compassion regarding violence. A lot of students, I was one of them when I was a freshman, have this naive perception that if we just like it's a bastardization of the love thing that I said earlier. If we just love more, if we're just more empathetic, then the whole world's problems will go away. And that, unfortunately, is not how violence and love works. Imagine telling that to someone when, I hate to use them so many times, but imagine telling that to someone when Hitler was rising in World War II. We should just not fight. We should show him the error of his ways through discussion and dialogue. No. Sometimes love and compassion means using violence. Now, that should be the last resort, but the fact is we live in a world where many cultures are not as, and don't take what I say next literally. They're not as evolved as US and European cultures. I don't mean that they're genetically inferior or that on an objective level their culture is worse. I mean, on a relative sense, the degree of knowledge, love, and consciousness that people have in overall, general, US, North American, and European cultures tend to be more evolved in those three things compared to others. And so just applying your compassionate, nonviolent solution to all these other cultures where some of them still don't have their survival needs met. Everything is scarce. They need to fight each other in order to get these. They're basically living like our tribalistic ancestors. Not going to work. So being wise in that situation is appreciating that the context alters what you should do. Another aspect of wisdom, selflessness. We've talked about this in love. Wise people do not have a sphere of concern which just includes them, their tribe, and their country. It includes the most wise, the universe, everything. Another aspect, since I think we've handled selflessness before, is proper valuing. We discussed that objectively there is no truth. There is absolute truth, but there's all the relative truths that you have are not they fall apart on an objective sense. But that doesn't mean you can't live with values, right? We live in a relativistic way, so we need to have some metric through which to act, and those are your values. So being wise means becoming not only aware of what your values are right now, which you might not know, but also consciously altering them as you grow into different identities. So how do you know? Well, let me use my values as an example first. All right, what do I value? Number one, spirituality. Oh, actually, no, that's not number one. Number one, truth, with a capital T. I can't get into the profundity of why that's my number one value right now, but it is. Number 2, spirituality, growing in love and consciousness and knowledge. Number 3, infinite game, which is what I described earlier. Number 4, I believe, is rippling, which is the notion that all of your actions reverberate into others, and then they reverberate out into others. So you can have a much larger impact than you ever could have thought because of this. It's very empowering when you realize it. I think number 5 is wisdom. Might be wisdom. It changes every now and then. So number 5 is wisdom or love or contribution. I can't remember, but those are my values. I suggest you go through a value exercise yourself and figure out what your values are if you haven't done it already, and also routinely come back to these and change them over time, because they will change. And you will find once you know what your values are, it becomes so much easier to know what you should say yes and no to, because you just see against your values, does this work? Does this resonate with the person that I want to become? Now you might be saying, Aiden, how do I know what are good values and what are bad values? Because my parents are telling me I should value this, and my friends are telling me I should value that, and I think I should value this. What do I do? It's a very good problem and a very good question to be asking. If you're asking that question, oh man, you're far in this whole path. It's actually really, really easy to know which values are good and which are bad. It's the implementing which is hard. All right, and I'm gonna give you this one heuristic. You can use this for anything, any one of your values. When I say it, you're gonna be like, oh my God, of course. Good values build knowledge, love, and consciousness in the universe. And bad values don't. That's it. So you can use that to assess every single one of your values. Is this building knowledge, love, and consciousness? If it's not a good value. Oh man. Sometimes it's really satisfying in this work when you ask a question and that you've been asking for years, and then you get an answer back that is so obvious when you hear it, and yet 99.9% of people don't know it, that it's just perplexing, just utterly baffling that this is not taught in colleges. It's true, and this is why I'm so glad that you're watching this video. It is, you should feel so offended that this isn't taught in colleges. You should be well, if you're fully embodying love, you wouldn't feel this way. But maybe just for this one moment, you should be so mad that this is not taught in colleges, that it is just baffling to you on the deepest level of knowing. Oh my God. Okay. Another aspect of wisdom is conscious prioritizing. This goes back to conscious that we were talking about before. As I said, everything's connected, especially in this first principle of what you should be seeking in college. So conscious prioritizing means being aware not only of your values, but how you're prioritizing things and if they are actually embodying your values or not. Going back to the movie metaphor, you can still be aware of your values, but you can prioritize them unconsciously. Okay, you know your values, but you're still absorbed in the movie. Conscious prioritizing is not only knowing what your values are, but also knowing that you're watching the movie and then altering what you're watching based off of that awareness. So a good example of me not consciously prioritizing was twofold. When I was in high school, first off, I used to play the grade game, as you might be intimately familiar with. And I tracked down how to get the best grades like a missile honing in on its target. That was all I cared about. I was consumed with this mission. I didn't care about long-term learning. I didn't care about what I was learning. I just wanted to get good grades. And looking back, it definitely had to do with the unconscious belief that I wasn't whole, and that the if I could just get a good A plus, that would show that I deserved to exist. Thankfully, I evolved past that point when I became more conscious of it, but I still do it all the time, even now. Not the grades in specific, but just living unconsciously. Another example is when I was a content creator in the note-taking space, personal knowledge management, and I had this grand idea that if I just niched into note-taking and then made a whole bunch of content on note-taking, then I could become financially independent and move wherever I wanted, do whatever I wanted, because I would have all the money that I needed. It's so stupid looking back. And I had no awareness of how the content that I was creating in note-taking, while it was under the guise of benefiting other people with note-taking, I didn't see that I really wasn't targeting the root level, right? This is something that once you get more into this path, you'll start questioning with everything you're doing. How is it rippling out into society? And what I mean by targeting the root level is I wasn't at the deepest levels of spiral knowing. I was telling people, I was at arc 3 in band 2 of applying. I was telling people, this is the note-taking strategy, this is how you apply it. And I was never talking about, okay, how is this fundamentally restructuring your conscious experience and the way that you relate to world? And how is this making you, how can you use this note-taking to inquire deeper into yourself, your values, and how you relate, and journaling about your feelings and whatnot. Thankfully, I'd started doing this more and more as I got more conscious myself. But for a long time, that was what my content was like. And I wasn't really conscious of how, even though I valued wisdom and spirituality back then too, I really wasn't embodying it in my actions. So that's another aspect of wisdom. Acting is a really important aspect of wisdom. There's a lot of a trap is talking a lot but not doing anything. You have to embody it in order for it to affect you, right? This gets at spiral knowing again. Is if you're just talking about something and you understand it, you're actually at the lowest level possible of knowing, which is you're at band 1, remembering and understanding. It's only once you start acting that you get to band 2 when you apply. And then when you reflect on that experience, if you're doing it from an inquiry lens and from arc 8 and experiencing, that's when you start changing your relationship with the world. Your identity starts changing. And that is where the most powerful change is in that deepest band 3. And yet notice how self-help is rarely talked about in college. And again, I'm not saying if professors are watching this, students are watching, that is your fault. You live in a system. But it's your responsibility to work on changing the way that things are. It's a tragedy that self-help isn't even talked about. Like none of the stuff that I'm talking about, for the most part, is not discussed in class. And even if it is talked about, because I did get to talk about it surprisingly in like 2 classes, better decisions and self-regulation, there isn't that much of a emphasis on actually doing it. I mean, in self-regulation, thankfully we did have a project long term over the class of acting on some of the stuff they were learning, but it wasn't that well enforced. Most students I got the perception of weren't really into it. And so this acting part was completely missed out on. And in a sense, the wisdom that you could get was also missed out on because of that. Another aspect of wisdom is self-inquiry. We've hit on this a little, but it's not just knowing your values, being aware of the fact that you are experiencing consciousness that is important in order to live wisely. It's also having an ecology of practices that check and balance each other to keep you aware. Because it's one thing to be aware for a bit, like a day, even 5 minutes when you're meditating. But as you'll notice once you start doing this more and more, is it's so easy to be aware for a week and be high on life. You're like, yes, I've done it. I've awakened. I'm aware all the time. This is great. How could I ever have lived the way that I did before? And then you drink a little too much one day. Your girlfriend or boyfriend breaks up with you. Something else tragic happens in your life. And suddenly you're skyrocketed back into the movie and you are utterly unaware of what's happening. Oh, it still feels like you're conscious of life, but you've so soaked into self-deception because of this event, and you didn't have the practices in place to become aware again, that you might be stuck again in the movie for years before you come back out. And that's why it's so important to be wise, to have an ecology of practices that check and balance each other to make sure that doesn't happen. By ecology of practices, I mean anything it could be anything that has to do with self-inquiry. It could be meditation, it could be contemplation, yoga, mindfulness, journaling. What works for you works for you. The whole reason I'm not giving you, and this is also why I'm not giving you a technique for any of these things throughout this whole video that I've been describing, is because if I gave you a technique, you would be in the danger of taking that technique and then dogmatically applying it in order to follow what I'm saying. That's not going to work, because you need to adapt to your context. Everything I'm saying you should question. Everything. Don't take anything I'm saying at face value. Even the idea that you should question everything I'm saying, you should question. See, it goes full circle. Oh my God. So yeah, you need an ecology of practices that check and balance in order to become aware again once you get spiraled back into unawareness. Second to last aspect of wisdom is blending logic and emotion together. There tends to be this perception in some people, even if they've evolved a little bit past it, there's still an unconscious way that language is used that hints that they still believe it, that logic and emotion are separate. I'm not saying it's not useful to separate them. It is. That's why we do it. To say I have a thought versus a feeling is really practical when I'm communicating. But just like with all dualistic distinctions on reality, you need to see that ultimately it all dissolves at the objective sense. And the same thing is true of logic and emotion. They are fundamentally connected. And to believe they aren't can be really deceiving. A good example, often, especially in the conservative spaces in the US, I'm not saying the Democrats don't do this too. Both sides do this a lot. But I would say the conservatives do it a little more. There's this statement like, facts don't care about your feelings. And it's thrown out like it's like a boom, hammer to anything that someone says. And this statement is really funny because it's actually the exact opposite, which is feelings don't care about your facts. There's good research on this by Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind, showing that most people, if they're not aware of their tendency to do this, and even if they're aware, it still needs to be navigated almost every single time. They hear something that triggers an emotional reaction. Usually it's something like a triggering moral thing, like you burn the flag of the United States of America. Is this moral or not? They get an emotional reaction, and then they rationalize what it is that they felt afterward. So if it was a negative reaction there, they would be like, well, of course that's immoral, or of course that's moral, and here's why. And the funny thing is, and here's where it gets really trippy, the logic for both of them can be exquisite. It often isn't, but you can give some great logic for both of those reasons. It just depends what your evaluation is, what values you're using from before in order to do this. And even if your values are love consciousness, and hiring knowledge for the universe, you can still make so many different arguments for why something should be the case. So what I want you to see is that ultimately logic and emotion are fundamentally connected, because your facts come with emotional baggage, and your emotional baggage comes with facts. And realizing that helps build wisdom, because then you can question. When you feel an emotional reaction, you're aware of that. You're like, okay, that's interesting. What if that emotional reaction is wrong? What if everything that I've been rationalizing with my entire life has been based off of the emotional reactions that I've built up from all of the socialization that I had when I was younger and now? And that's when you can move into the lower bands of spiral knowing, experiencing and inquiring, and you can start to really break down all of this socialization and this knowledge baggage, and you can start to, not perfectly, because you'll never be perfect from a relativistic sense, but much, much better argue combining logic and emotion without either one completely obscuring the other. And do so from a lens that will increase humanity's or the universe's knowledge, love, and consciousness. And the last part of wisdom, which I want to highlight, is flow with life, not against it. This is a highly old idea regarding wisdom. First talked about in the Tao Te Ching in China. The Tao is impossible to describe. I mean, the first line goes, the Tao that is told is not the eternal Tao. But one of the essential ideas of the Tao is you need to flow with it instead of against it. What do I mean by flow with it? I mean, don't become attached to conscious experience. Don't blend with it, right? Live through consciousness, not from consciousness. Back to the movie metaphor. When you're attached to something, you think you blend with the thing, and you believe that you need it to be whole, right? So a concrete example, grades. Even if you've somewhat navigated your relationship with grades since coming to college, you might still be attached on having a good grade. And when you go to your class and you don't get as good of a grade, because that attachment is there, you feel bad. And then you blend with that emotion and you let it affect all the rest of your consciousness for the next few days. You're flowing against life, not with it. Now, I am not saying that you shouldn't feel what you're feeling, or that you shouldn't feel bad necessarily if you get a bad grade. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying don't mistake the emotion as you. Remember, you are not what happens in your consciousness. You are the awareness that is watching the consciousness. You are not the movie, you are the movie watcher. And so when you're attached, when you blend with the emotion coming in, you let it control you completely. And this isn't just with emotions. This is with thoughts. This is with people. This is with spirituality, even. You can't become attached to anything, because as soon as you become attached to anything, you let that thing supersede truth with a capital T. And that's when deception comes in. And that's when you end up living your life lowering love, consciousness, and knowledge without even realizing it. Focus on what is in your control, which ultimately is just your awareness, and found everything you do on that and on flowing with life without attachments, rather than becoming the river itself and mistaking that as you. You do all those things, then you are highly on the route to become not person A, person B. And this time, your actions will be building towards that person. And you might even be able to supersede person B and get all the best stuff of person A, and all the best stuff a person be, and none of the negatives. That's wisdom. All right, principle number 3 for what you should really be seeking in college. This is a big one. It's one that I think when I say, especially if you're at an elite college, you might assume, well, of course we're already doing this. But I really want you to look a little deeper when I say it. And that is, we need to help historically disadvantaged students, not just make the privileged more privileged. Now, before I say anything else, I want to first recognize how much work you did to get into elite college. If you're a student, how much work you did as a professor in order to get tenure at an elite college. There was probably a lot of nights of tireless studying, of not going out with your friends, not drinking. As a professor, there was a lot of research that probably needed to be done. If you're at a research university, a lot of weekends spent working instead of relaxing with your friends, with your wife or husband. I am not discounting any of that with what I say next. But the question that I want you to reflect upon and really look deep into this question, because it goes much, much deeper than you might be thinking, is did you get here through a meritocratic process? If you contemplate this enough, and you might be on the opposite end of the spectrum, you might say, well, Aiden, I know that things are highly systemically unequal, and I know how disadvantaged some people are in comparison to me, and I'm not doing anything to perpetuate that. But I think a lot of people assume they know about these systemic inequalities, especially in elite colleges, just because it's the environment that we're in, but they don't see how deep the rabbit hole goes and how much it speaks about not only their college existence, but life as a whole. There are some very sneaky things going on here that talk a lot about collective ego and systems, which we'll talk more about in the 4th principle with critical thinking, but there's a lot here that we can unpack. So what I want to tell you, and you might already believe this, you might not, but I want to further it, is that meritocracy is an illusion. Let's use me as an example, all right? Now, let's define meritocracy first. Essentially, it's the idea that the effort that you put in is equal to the outcome that you get. And that, unfortunately, discounts one of the most important aspects of something being truly meritocratic, which some better definitions take this into account, but they still don't appreciate the profound degree to which it's not true, which is that opportunity should be an aspect of meritocracy. And the fact is that the opportunity disparity is insanely high in ways that you might not even imagine. So again, let's use me as an example. I grew up with all my survival needs fulfilled. Didn't have to think about food, water, shelter. I had stable, loving parents, which, by the way, that is really rare. Almost every single person I've talked to has some negative relationship with at least one of their parents. Because I had all those survival needs filled, I could focus on the growth needs if you look at Maslow's hierarchy from the get-go. Now, I still didn't a lot of the time, and I focused on grades and video games and shooting the shit, but that was huge in opportunity. Another thing, my relationship opportunities. I grew up in the small rural town of Hamilton, New York, where we had a university, Colgate University, right next to us with a whole bunch of professors, kids that were professor kids, college students, and just the environment and relationship that cultivates of knowledge and growth. Even if that college doesn't prioritize a lot of things I'm mentioning with here, it still fundamentally alters the opportunity I had because of the relationships I was around, right? The people that you surround yourself with profoundly impact who you become, because those are who you aspire to be. The context that I grew up in valued education a lot. My dad would often talk about, and my mom at dinner, about the importance of getting educated and valuing learning. They both have PhDs. My dad went to Harvard. My mom has a PhD in chemistry and biology. Valued education a lot, which made me want to go to an elite college. If they didn't, I probably wouldn't have wanted to. I also there's a lot of generational wealth, right? My dad's dad was a neurosurgeon, so he made a lot of money, the neurosurgeon. And even though my mom didn't have a ton of money, there was really wasn't that much of a financial issue in my household, at least for me. That wasn't something that was on my mind. My social identities are fantastic. I'm white. I speak English as a first language. I'm US born. I'm male. These are all incredible advantages in the context of the US because of the historical inequalities that have shown up, and English being the dominant business language, US being very, very wealthy, white being the dominant race that has superseded a lot of the other races in history. So that all benefited me, even if I wasn't aware of it. Another thing, nepotism. You know how much easier it is to get into an elite college when you have a parent who's gone to an elite college? Did you know that a ridiculously large amount of legacy students get over prioritized of getting into colleges? It's really scandalous, actually. It's like if your parent went to an elite college, you are so much more likely. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but so much more likely to get in compared to someone who's first gen. And here's where we get really meta. A lot of the stuff that I've mentioned so far is about like external circumstances, like having money, survival identities fulfilled, my social identities. But it doesn't, meritocracy disparity doesn't just apply to that. It applies to internal things as well. You're like, yes, I value hard work. You know, I worked my butt off in order to get to an elite college, even though I didn't have any of the things that you just mentioned above, Aiden. So, you know, where's the opportunity disparity in that? Well, even then, I would hedge my bet that you grew up in a context which still valued hard work. You worked your butt off, sure, but so did your butt's ancestors, which not only created generational glutes of privilege, of wealth, or not, maybe it just created generational glutes of valuing hard work, which absolutely played a role in you getting into where you are. Because if you didn't value hard work, you wouldn't have worked hard enough to get into elite college. So even the things you value, the things you think are inherently you, has an opportunity disparity to it. And so you might say, but Aiden, I'm not doing anything explicitly to harm these disadvantaged students, disadvantaged people in the world. Everything you're saying sounds great. What am I supposed to do about it? Right? I'm going to college. I'm focusing on growing myself now so that later I can help these students. No. It goes so much deeper than you expect, because any action that you take perpetuates the system that you engage in. Let me give you some examples so you really see the profundity of the statement. Buying coffee at the cafe, Olin Library, Fair Cornell. You might say, well, how could this possibly hurt the disadvantaged students or people? Well, where did that coffee come from? Right? Because it's very likely that those coffee beans were harvested in some third world country that has basically slave labor getting the coffee beans accessible to you, just so that you could have it in your dining hall and just buy it right away instead of grinding it up yourself and getting it. What about the cup that the coffee is placed in? That's probably industrial factory made, because making a coffee cup by hand, they're definitely not doing that for your coffee cups at the coffee cafe. So buying the coffee cup is perpetuating that factory making the coffee cups, which perpetuates all the workers in there that probably are living like soulless lives, creating these coffee cups in order to be able to send it to Olin Library so that you can have your coffee. And so please don't get the impression what I'm saying is, oh, you're a bad person. How dare you buy coffee? I still buy coffee, right? But the difference is I do it accepting responsibility for how I'm perpetuating the system while doing it. I'm aware of it. I'm more conscious. So you're not a bad person for buying coffee. But you are a bad person if you're aware of it and you still don't accept responsibility for how you're perpetuating the system. Another example, watching YouTube. How could that possibly perpetuate disadvantagedness or anything? Well, watching YouTube supports the YouTube platform. There's a whole bunch of really disgusting stuff on the YouTube platform. You know, kids go onto the YouTube platform, and because of the echo chambered nature of the YouTube platform, because YouTube doesn't value promoting truth, YouTube values promoting the content that will keep you on the YouTube platform the longest. So that's probably why this video that I'm making now isn't going to get that many views. Who knows? Maybe it will. But my hopes aren't that high, because the video that's going to get a whole bunch of views is the cat video that keeps you unconscious because it's just about a cat just flopping around, having fun. And, you know, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any of those videos, but the fact is YouTube platform does not care about making you more loving, conscious, and knowledgeable. It cares about keeping you on the platform. So when you watch YouTube, you're perpetuating a model of content creation which promotes unconsciousness. Now, again, you're not a bad person for watching YouTube. This is the platform the majority of people use. So I accept when I create videos on this platform, it's just the way I have. If I want to promote more knowledge, love, and consciousness in the world, then I need to use this platform to some degree. And hopefully the platform, as humanity becomes more conscious, will change to promote that instead of soulless, deceptive content. That's going to take a long time. This applies to social media too. If you use Instagram, if you use Snapchat, if you use TikTok, whatever. It might even be worse than YouTube, because there's so much data out there about the negatives of social media on especially our generation, Gen Z's relationship with the world. Makes you more anxious, takes away your time for genuine social connection, makes you less focused. And so when you're using these platforms, you're perpetuating them in society. Again, not your fault. It's a tragedy of the commons. Most people use social media that are in our generation, so you feel like you're missing out when you're not. Personally, I don't use it at all. This is the one out of the three things I've said where I think the ramifications are so bad in using it that I actually actively avoid it. But I can 100% resonate and understand and empathize if you still use it regardless, if your friend group uses it a lot or whatnot. With all three of these things, even if you don't think you're perpetuating a system, like you're in the moral high ground, not perpetuating any disadvantagedness or whatnot, you absolutely are. And being more conscious means taking responsibility in that. So what you can do is slowly become aware of the systems that you take part in, or highlight it as a professor if you're teaching students. And as you become more aware of your life purpose, work on changing those systems in whatever way you can, or not engaging in them at all, for the betterment of the universe. And why is helping these disadvantaged systems good? Why is helping this meritocratic process become more meritocratic? Well, for one, if things are more meritocratic, it helps you, because you will get to benefit from working hard and doing all this other stuff. It really sucks when you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and someone, you're actually disadvantaged because of the system instead of advantaged by it. I had this experience actually in an intergroup dialogue class at Cornell. I can never know for certain, but I'm pretty sure the reason I did not get to be a facilitator for one of the next year's classes is because of my social identities as a white male, and how that I got the sense that some of the people in the class, when I spoke, especially one of the instructors in particular, had an inherent disliking for me because of my social identities in this context. Now, I can't be certain, might just be projecting and still salty, but man, does it not feel good when you're on the other side. So that's why it's beneficial. Also, why does it help to help these people? Because they are you, right? Everything is one. Everything's in your consciousness. So when you're hurting these people, you're just hurting yourself. And as you become more aware of that, helping these people is helping you. Practically everything that goes around comes around, right? The person that you don't help because of not working on the system, they could be the school shooter that kills your daughter, or kills your friend, or kills your dad, whatever. It could be the person which mugs you on the street. You're just walking around, suddenly, boom, gun, your wallet. They could be the reason that housing is so expensive because all of society doesn't have its crap together in terms of fulfilling everyone's basic needs. Because of being in Generation Z, I probably won't be able to buy a house for a long time, if I even buy a house, because the rental prices are insanely high because of the system. Helping fix the system in terms of meritocracy will lead to more diversity, more innovation, and critical thinking. There's been studies on this, that a college campus, when things are more diverse, you have more ideas coming together, more cross-pollination, and therefore more innovation and more critical thinking. I am blessed to be at Cornell because of how diverse the campus is. The slogan is literally any person, any study. It's awesome. I think part of the reason I was able to do this work in the first place is because of all this diversity. If I didn't have this diversity to push me out of my comfort zone, I might still be playing video games and focusing way too much on work instead of relationships. Another benefit is there'll be less tokenism. Now, I haven't personally experienced this because I'm not a disadvantaged social identity, but when you're one of the only disadvantaged social identities on campus, you're tokenized by everyone else. You're like, wow, it's the one African American that we know in our friend group, or the one Native American, or place whatever you want. And that does a ringer on your mental health, because now everyone has these stereotypes that they're projecting onto you, even if they don't mean to. I'm sure most of these people are well-meaning, compassionate people. And we know from stereotype threat that sometimes you will meet those stereotypes and it sucks, right? So having more diversity on campus will lead to less tokenism as well. There'll also be more minority role models. You know how much easier it is for me to get into this spiritual work because I know of someone named Leo Gura in Actualize.org, and John Vervaeke, and Dan Coe, and everyone I just named is a white male. Oh, man. Hopefully we'll have some non-white male YouTube spiritual. Well, we have Healthy Gamer GG. That's good. Let's do more of that. It's much easier to get into the work when you're like, oh, role model. Because even if you consciously know that it's ridiculous to say, oh, well, just because there's not someone of my race and my gender and my religion doing this, I wouldn't be able to do it. Unconsciously, it absolutely has an effect. You're like, I can't do it. There's not someone like me who's already doing it. And so helping fix the system will lead to more minority role models, which will help in the long term. I don't want you to offload this to your future self. I don't want you to think, okay, I'm going to the elite college now so that I can help afterward. No, you will never stop procrastinating. The best time to start working on this was 15 years ago or 10 years ago. It was 15 and you're a student, probably. I mean, it's like 6 or 4, right? Every time you engage in anything, you're perpetuating the system that you're doing. So don't offload it till later. Even if it's just one small little action, even if it's just becoming more aware of how you're perpetuating these systems, that's incredibly valuable. Principle number 4 of what you should really be seeking in college. This is another huge one, so I'm really excited to talk about it. That is, create critical thinking skills. This includes systems thinking, holism, and diving deeper into spiral knowing. So, what are the current problems with critical thinking inside of colleges? Admittingly, there's a good amount that is sometimes created, especially particular professors, particular students. But overall, the college system, at least the elite college system, does not promote true critical thinking that much. Critical thinking skills that are all the way at the deepest level of spiral knowing. One of the reasons for that is classes are too siloed. As I said earlier, I do have some classes that are connected that I experienced, but ultimately the connections were very sparse, and it's not appreciating the fundamental interconnectedness of all of reality, which we'll get to later with holism a little more. We can go so much farther. Another issue is that there's too much structure in some majors. This is fair if it's conscious structure. You purposely put yourself in a degree that is very siloed so that you can go specifically into that field. Even then, I would argue that you're hurting yourself by not being a little bit more of a generalist, because that's what humanity is trending towards in terms of value. But if it's conscious, that's okay. The thing that I have a problem with is that there's a lot of majors that people go into unconsciously, and then because there's not that much distribution credits, you can't take college classes outside of your major that easily. My major was super lucky. I was a human development major. I always say I'm psych because explaining to people what human development is takes more time than I want to. And because of that, I had all these distribution requirements that I could use to take a whole bunch of weird classes. And it ended up being so good for me. Oh my God. I took a cooking class. I took a psych of teaching class. I took a strategic thinking class in the business department. I took bike touring as a phys ed. I took all of these weird classes and they just mixed them together. And that ended up doing leaps and bounds for my critical thinking skills, because I realized all knowledge is fundamentally connected. And being too structured in your major really hinders you from seeing that. Another issue with critical thinking is that, especially in elite college campuses, the left can go too far. By left, I mean political left. And we need to be very careful here as I say this, because a trap that you can fall into is thinking, oh, Aiden's demonizing the left. He must be a conservative. No, I'm not a left or a right. I don't identify with either, because there's so many problems with both of them as they are right now. The reason I point specifically to the left, even though I could say so many things about the right as well, is that it's often the left that dominates elite college campuses, and therefore it's the left that you'll be most intimately aware about the problems of. One of those issues is that we demonize the right too much. When I was in college, sometimes some of the people I hung about or the professors I talked to, whenever they referred to the right, it was always with this like scandalous, sort of contemptuous manner. Not everyone did this, admittingly, but this does not promote genuine critical thinking. Because if we are looking at the most objective sense, trying to be the highest critical thinker possible, we would not adhere to this groupthink and black and white demonization. We would ask, what is the potential truth underlying the right's beliefs? And you'll see there's a lot of value in what they say. But because the left often clouds it so much, it's harder to see. And I'm also not saying that the outcome of this is just let the right say whatever they want, let everyone come onto campus, free speech at all times. I'm generally a pretty big promoter of free speech, but demonizing, letting that all happen is also a bad idea, right? It's a balance of being able to, on the one hand, see the faults, and then also, without any preconceived notions, seek the truth in the right statements. We often don't get taught that on campus. We also, in the left, can be far too idealistic and want things done too fast. The left tends to have a very weak understanding of the state of the world because they often come from more developed, educated countries, and they have no idea that most of the world still doesn't have its survival needs fulfilled. So they end up having this naive compassion, this naive belief that everyone should be as idealistic as them, and we want it done fast. And this is completely ignorant to the reality of the situation for what most of the world is like right now. And the reality is, if we want to get them to improve as well, we can't just project our own beliefs of what our culture looks like onto them. We need to follow upaya, follow skillful means, adapt to their situation, and think about, in loving them, how are we going to do that long term instead of just projecting ourselves onto it. So another issue with critical thinking is there's no self-inquiry norm on campus. We've talked about this extensively a bit, but we don't get talked about ecological practice, ecology of practices. Don't get taught about meditation, mindfulness, journaling. That's rarely talked about, and that is the root off of which deeper levels of knowing are built. So critical thinking is much harder when that doesn't occur. In general, we don't go meta enough. We assume, even if you as a teacher don't believe this yourself, the way we teach things can sometimes come across as, well, this is what we've discovered already, and now we're just building on top of that. And we can't do that. If we want to be critical thinkers, very radical to say, we need to leave everything off the table. Nothing is sacrosanct. Even the very belief that we are alive is not sacrosanct. You have to go to the very root level if you want to do pure critical thinking. And most people aren't willing to do that because that would require dissolving their self. And we're attached to ourselves. I'm attached to myself. Even I struggle to go that deep a lot of the time. So there needs to be a more routine meta going in our classes of seeing the relationship that we have to the knowledge rather than just the transferring of the knowledge itself. Another problem is professors and students don't interact much outside of their own bubbles. If you're a professor, you probably hang out with people at your department, maybe some outside of that, not much interaction aside from that. If you're a student, probably hang out with people in your major, maybe a little outside. There's probably a whole bunch of spaces you're not going to. This is bad for two reasons. Firstly, on the professor and student level, it hurts your ability to see the differing perspectives. It would boost your critical thinking of other professors and students. And then from the professor to student level, it's terrible because the professors don't know what motivates the students and what their learning gaps are. And then some of the students don't know what the professor's thinking, and they feel like they're sort of this like mystical figure that they can't really talk to. And so this just ends up just hurting both parties. I think not a single one of my classes, this is another video I'll make at some point, had a deep and genuine understanding of what Gen Z cares about. And that's a problem, because if you're teaching a class and you don't know what the students that you're teaching actually care about, how are you going to motivate them to care about the class? And lastly, and this is a big one, this is why I'm laughing, there's other critical thinking problems, but this is the obsession with grades. Oh my God, grades. I mean, every student and professor knows the problem with grades, but I don't think a lot of them fully appreciate how deep it goes. Because here's the thing. Let me introduce you to a law called Goodhart's Law. Basically, what it is that when a metric becomes a goal, it ceases to be a good metric. Grades. Grades are supposed to be a metric for learning, and yet for a lot of people, even if they're not consciously aware of it, they have become the goal itself, which, to Goodhart's law, makes it a horrible metric for learning. Because as soon as you start optimizing a metric for learning, everything becomes about increasing the metric rather than the learning itself. And this has happened with so many students. It happened with me when I was in high school. The compassion I feel for you is very deep because, again, we live in a system that prioritizes grades, even if they're not genuinely good for learning. And the interesting thing is that once you get out of college, the funny thing that you'll notice is that unless you're going down a traditional career path like engineering, law, medicine, some other stuff I'm not mentioning, they don't care nearly as much about grades as you think. Your employers care much more about your capabilities. So if you've been focusing on grades the whole time, you should be scared. Now, unfortunately, we're still not in that area with some of the more traditional paths, but someday, hopefully from these videos and other things, we will. I need you to understand 3 things about grades, which we can't go super in depth for each because this will be also another video in itself. But firstly, they're mathematically inaccurate. Think about it. Grades exist on a 0 to 100 scale, with 0 to 65 being a fail. Is that what we want to be teaching our students? That the majority of their score is a fail? 0 to 65 is failure? And I mean, we know how the students think because they're at an elite college. I've heard them talk about anything below a 90 is a failure for them, anything below an A. Some people, even an A+. Oftentimes the Asian Americans, because they came from such a grade-obsessed culture. And so that's completely mathematically inaccurate. That 0 to 65 being a failure. Another problem is, and then this isn't to mention that a lot of professors will give zeros as a grade, which is an awful idea because does that represent your actual learning of the subject? Where you didn't do one assignment, you didn't do one thing, and now you have a 0, which just destroys your grade. If you ever gotten a 0 on an assignment, oh my God, you know what I'm talking about. It's awful. It feels so demotivating because no matter what you do, there's no way you're going to get an A in that class anymore, unless the 0 was for like a homework assignment. That's basically all you got. So that's very mathematically inaccurate. One assignment wrong as a 0 is not representing your actual understanding and knowledge of the subject. Another problem is they're incredibly biased. And one of the reasons for this is that we often give grades for things that are really subjective. Like, for example, participation or giving extra credit. You might think these aren't biased, but what's your definition of participation? Is your definition of participation raising your hand in class and answering a question? Is it participating in group work? Is it doing the assignments even if you don't participate actively in class? Look, I'm all for pushing more participation from students. I do think everyone should learn to overcome their fear of anxiety of raising their hand. But the fact is, if you're grading that, you are artificially biasing towards students that come from a culture that has your standards of participation attached to it. So you can still grade it, but don't count it as the final grade. Just use it as a source of feedback for your students. Same thing with extra credit. Which students do you think have more time to do the extra credit? The socially advantaged students that don't need to work on the side? Or the students that are first generation, now they have 2 jobs, they're taking care of a kid that their parents aren't even able to take care of, and you think the extra credit is fair and unbiased? No. I'm the one that benefits from the extra credit. I'm the one who doesn't have to work at college, who all the time in the world. I can spend all my time philosophizing and doing spirituality and stuff like this. It's great, but not great for everyone else. Finally, they're not made for motivation whatsoever. Grades are a heavily extrinsic form of motivating students. Nothing intrinsic about them. The only thing intrinsic about grades is the airy-fairy notion that by increasing them, you might be increasing your comprehension in some way, but often those are not as correlated as we would hope. There'll be a whole episode I'll do about octalysis motivation, because I literally work there, and the 8 core drives of what motivates people. But all you need to know now for these circumstances is that grades are the most left brain, black hat sort of motivation that you could think of. Left brain just means they're extrinsically motivated. Black hat means they make you feel out of control, non-agenic, less powerful. It's like the antithesis to intrinsic motivation is the way grades are implemented right now. And this really hurts critical thinking. So all this creates 2 scenarios, which we talked a little bit about before in the knowledge section of the first principle, which is we think our own bubble of reality is the bubble. And what I'm trying to do is I'm taking a pinprick and I'm popping it. And the other scenario is we fall into the relativity trap. Oh, everything's relative. There's no way we can make any evaluations. That's also a trap, because yes, everything's relative from an objective standpoint, but that doesn't mean some values don't lead to higher degrees of consciousness, love, and knowledge for the universe. They do. And so the question then becomes, well, how do we solve this? Right? I'm going to give you 3 different mindsets that we can use. Once again, not techniques. If I give you a technique for critical thinking, you should be very, very skeptical. So firstly, we go deeper into the level of the arcs of spiral knowing in the bands. I really want you to focus on the deeper parts of band 2 and band 3. And so those are in band 2, that's analyze and evaluate. And in band 3, create, inquire, and experience. What are some verbs that associate with those? Well, for analyze, it's organizing, comparing, questioning, discussing. For evaluate, supporting, critiquing, arguing, defending, judging, valuing. And at this point, we're still in band 2, practical knowing. And the reason that's important to know is that with critical thinking, at this level, at this band of knowing, you're able to start questioning the rules of what you already know, which is great. And we do to some degree build this in college. That's awesome. But there is little appreciation, if not no appreciation, of questioning the questioning of the rules. Right, going meta. That really only starts to happen in band 3, and especially the latter parts of band 3. With the relationship that we have with the knowledge is not that aware yet. And so if we really want to build the critical thinking skills, we go even farther. We go to creating, inquiring, and experiencing. And creating could be designing, developing, assembling, writing, producing, synthesizing, prototyping. Inquiring, this is really where it hits the road. Surfacing self-deception, contemplating, going meta, questioning, wondering, meditating, journaling, reflecting, observing, dialoguing. And then finally, we have the last level, experiencing. Perceiving affordances, direct experience, presencing, relating, witnessing, undergoing, becoming, identifying, blending, intuiting, attuning, immersing, resonating, dissolving. It's at these deeper levels where we really start to build that critical thinking ability, where we can go back to evaluating and analyzing now. And because we've built this participatory knowing, this band 3, those are more profound too. Because now we're analyzing and we're evaluating, but we have that meta awareness of the fact that we have to evaluate and analyze from a certain value structure, from a certain relative standpoint. That wasn't there before. Now it is. And we need to be building that in the college system itself. The way that we teach students, the way that students relate to each other and do their homework afterward. We need the conversations to be oriented around exactly that notion of the meta-awareness. And secondly, we should teach systems thinking. We hit a little bit on this in the section about helping disadvantaged students and people, but let's unpack it a little more, because systems thinking is very profound when it comes to critical thinking. In order to understand it, let's use the metaphor of a blind the blind men and the tiger. Right? You might have heard a variation of this called the blind men and the elephant, but I had to be unique, so So you have a whole bunch of blind men. There's a tiger. Each one's at a different point of the tiger. They reach out and they touch it. What do the blind men think they're touching? One of them touches the tail. They think it's a broomstick. One of them touches the tiger's face. They think it's a cat. One of them touches the tiger's back. They think it's a horse. That one's probably a little strange because tigers are a little more furry than horses, but maybe he's not very touch sensitive. Another one touches the grass at the tiger's feet. He thinks he's touching hay, not even a tiger. And then all of them communicate with each other, and they have absolutely no idea what it is that they're actually touching. Because they're all speaking from this weird language of like, oh, I'm touching a broomstick, I'm touching a piece of grass, I'm touching a horse's back, I'm touching a cat. And all of them think the other is insane for what they're saying. And then they all die because they're eaten by the tiger. Now, hopefully you're a more systems thinker than the blind men. And also, if you weren't thinking as much in systems, hopefully the consequence would not be you're eaten by a tiger. That would be unfortunate. But I want you to see the systems thinking in this metaphor, which is oftentimes, even if we're conscious of systems thinking, we still go about life as if it's not a system. We see our little bubble. We don't think about how it relates to all the other bubbles. And when we make statements about what we believe, someone's like, what's your stance on gun rights? You're like, I believe this. I always thought that was insane. Like, what, you just believe gun rights should be that? There's no respect of the context or the way that affects the system? Or like, what about gun rights in Texas versus gun rights in New York versus gun rights in sub-Saharan Africa? I'm going to have a different belief about gun rights depending upon the context. So, not appreciating the system, not being a critical thinker. What is systems thinking? It's an appreciation of the profound systematicity of reality and what a system is built of, which is ultimately built of players, conscious agents like students, professors, administrators. We have elements, which are unconscious factors like resources, environments, infrastructure. We have actions, which are behaviors inside of the system themselves. Sources and sinks. Sources provide some sort of information, and sinks are where they go into. Feedback mechanics, which are signals that tell how the system is doing, and triggering actions like prices, notifications, or progress bars could be examples of those. Feedback mechanics can change how the system reacts to itself. You have a balancing feedback system, negative feedback system, positive feedback system. We also have rewards, which are the things, incentives that drive behavior, whether intrinsic or extrinsic in the system. And then finally, the relationship between everything I just said. Yeah, you can see how difficult systems thinking is, which is exactly why most people don't do it, because it's so hard. And the thing that is so fascinating about systems is there's a few properties that make them very, very bizarre. One is they create emergent purpose. The parts of a system are not adequate for understanding the system itself. The whole of a system is different than the sum of its parts. Not necessarily greater in that it provides a better purpose, but different, right? And so it'd be like taking a frog and then isolating it from its environment, studying it in a laboratory, and then thinking you know what a frog is. But you don't, because a frog is a part of the context that it's in, is part of a system in the jungle, if you took it from there. And even if you were in the jungle and you studied the frog, and the frog might know you're there and act differently. And so you're not studying the true system. Now you see how hard system thinking is. Systems are paradoxical, right? They loop in on themselves. They change themselves in utterly bizarre ways. This is why they're nonlinear, right? They're rarely so simple to say a system is A to B, B to C. Often it's A to B, B to A to C, C to A, C to B. You see what's happening here? Totally nonlinear. They're self-organizing. There's no higher up God organizing the system. Even in a desert ecosystem, there's no desert God that like ordains over the system and keeps everything in place. No. Every individual part of the system acts in the system. It adapts to the system and the system adapts to it. And then it self-organizes and changes itself. Isn't that bizarre? Systems are parts of other systems. You can have smaller systems, and those systems are part of another system. And like the world, your weather in Ithaca, New York, can affect the whole climate of the region, which affects the whole world. Bizarre. This is what makes systems so hard to study. Some examples of systems: dining hall system, right? System for getting food to the dining hall, the students going into the dining hall using payment to get in, eating, changing the whole system of their body based off of what they ate. The class system, signing up for classes. And then climate change as well as a good example. How do you change systems? Well, and this is very important because if you can get this point, you can really cause some big effects in society. The most valuable point to change a system is in changing the very paradigm through which the system interprets itself. This is essential, right? Because everything else, changing the relationships, changing the players, changing the elements, you're still changing in the system. When you change the paradigm through which the system interprets itself, you are changing on, you're focusing on the system as a whole. And that can profoundly influence the system. Think Thomas Kuhn's scientific revolutions. How does science advance? Paradigm changes. Paradigm change when we had the theory of evolution come out. That fundamentally altered society. Religion became much less popular because of evolution. I'm changing the system through which we interpret college using this video. This video is a representation of what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to get you to change how you perceive what a college education should be. Is the highest leverage point for changing a system. Everything else is nothing compared to this. Doesn't mean you don't focus on the other things, but it's not nearly as effective. And yet, at the same time, changing the system's interpretation of self is the hardest out of all of the leverage points. Because as we said, people want to survive the identity that they have. Collective egos want to survive the identity that they have. And so getting them to change means you have to get them to die. And that's really hard. It's really hard. But it's worth it. It's worth it. The third and last way that you can build your critical thinking skills in college is teaching and learning holism. Systems thinking is just one aspect of holism. Holism is all about understanding all of reality. And the notion of holism is all about the idea that reality is made up of holons, parts and wholes in themselves. And before I give some examples, I do want to say I don't mean to demean science here by saying holon, because I know a lot of quantum physics particles are named ons of some sort, right? The holons were invented by Ken Wilber, really good philosopher. And the reason I'm using holon as a term is because a lot of people already know it because of his book. But I don't mean to say, oh, science is bad because they're talking about quantum particles and reality is really made up of holons. From a relative sense, yes, reality could be made up of quantum particles based off of our current scientific understanding. Reason I use holons is because from an objective standpoint, reality is made up of holons. Definitely not made up of quantum particles. Right? Quantum particles are a projection that we put onto reality. We put finite bounds onto the infinite. We made a holon. The quantum particles are holons. There are parts which are holes in themselves. A chair is a holon. It's a whole chair, but it's also a part of your table, part of your room. A student's a holon. Whole in themselves, but also a part of a college ecosystem. This video is a holon. It's a whole video, but it's also a part of what will very clearly now be a 2-part series, because this is way longer than I was expecting. I just started talking and the universe just channeled all its insights into me. So it's just coming out. So why is this so profound? It's because, as we've alluded to in other parts of this episode, but we're really going to unpack here, everything is connected. Everything. And I don't mean psychology is connected to philosophy is connected to biology. I mean deeper than that. Everything is connected. Reality as a whole is infinite. In order for infinite to perceive infinite, it needs a finite thing, as we've said earlier. Everything needs a dualistic interpretation in order to be perceived at all. But ultimately, when you start questioning those dualistic interpretations, they fall apart. Right? Science and art falls apart. Mind and body falls apart. I just solved the mind-body problem for you, by the way. Philosophers have been arguing that for hundreds of years, if not thousands. The solution is actually really obvious, which it becomes very obvious to you once you start thinking in non-dual terms, which is there is no mind, there is no body in order to be separate. They're the same. Your mind exists in your body as a brain, or at least you think it does, and your body exists in your mind as a body. Everything is mind. So there is no distinction between mind and body. It's all in consciousness. Ta-da! So you and your friends, dualistic dissolves. You and your professor, dualism dissolves. You and your major, self-grades, dualism dissolves. Universe! Universe! One thing! That's why it's called the universe. Right? Listen to the language which we use. It has some really profound insights for you. So, why do we do this? Well, connecting to everything we've already said, we have to divide to survive. Being is conflict. Self versus self again, right? Lowercase self is the self that we mistake for our relativistic dualisms. And the self with a capital S is just the awareness that we bring to all of that. We have to communicate somehow, though. You might say, Aiden, you're saying all this relativism stuff, but you're communicating with relativisms because you're using language. Yeah, I have to, because this is the only way I can communicate to you, right? If you were completely enlightened, like fully, we wouldn't have to have this conversation because you'd already be enlightened. So you wouldn't be watching this video. You'd be doing something else, and whatever enlightened people do. So there's an interesting commentary about religion and science once you realize this, which is both have their problems with holism and why critical thinking ultimately is hurt when you take them too dogmatically. Firstly, religion, as much as I love it, I have a lot of religious friends. I think the spirit of religion is very profound. But ultimately, if you're to get at the root of the problem of religion, it's that it doesn't go far enough in what God is. A lot of religious people I know mistake God as a literal thing in the sky. And even if they see it in a metaphorical lens, like heaven is a metaphor, hell is a metaphor, God is a metaphor, they still follow certain dualistic commandments for what God says you should do, like the 10 Commandments. And you might say, Aiden, aren't you doing the same thing in this video? You're giving principles, aren't you? We should follow love, consciousness, and knowledge. Yes, I am. But notice, really contemplate how it's different from what most religions do. Actually, all religions do, if you practice them in the way that I'm talking about, which is ultimately the stuff I'm advocating for is that you question literally every single dualistic bound that you have taken. And once you do that, you will see that reality is profoundly loving and conscious and knowledgeable. And you will inherently want to do the things that I'm saying because that is the only natural outcome of doing that. And yet, a lot of religions will give you these commandments and they'll say you have to pray at this time every single day, you have to go to church at this time. And that's not following a breaking of dualistic bounds, that's only solidifying them. That is replacing truth with a capital T with a lowercase truth. And while I can respect a lot of the relationships that religion gives you with humanity, it's done a lot of great, it's done a lot of good. A lot of religious people that I know are some of the best people I know, the most aspiring. Ultimately, they cannot realize full truth unless they drop their religion. And that's really hard to do. And science is not immune to this either. I know a lot of great scientists too. I'm a scientist. But the problem is that you can also run into the same issue as religion does, which is if you're not mindful, and a lot of scientists don't fall into this, but if you're not, you can replace scientific falsifiable truths with dogma. A lot of scientists operate under materialist objective paradigm. They don't see the profound consciousness that's behind everything, and that ultimately makes it so that they put science above metaphysics, when metaphysics is definitely foundational to science. So there's problems with both religion and science in critical thinking. I could go so much more with both of those, but we're already like 2+ hours in. So why is this important? It's because when we don't teach holism, we cut off ourselves from ourselves, others, and the world. We mistake ourselves as a finite part of reality rather than fundamentally connected to everything. We defend our own dualistic slice of reality, thinking that it's the right one. We don't see the bigger picture. Everything is you. Everything is consciousness. Everything is infinity. You see this play out in political polarization, where you mistake your political party as the truth. Labs fighting each other, not seeing that we're all working towards bettering science in the long run. Fighting for an internship. Ultimately, building critical thinking comes down to seeing the fundamental interconnectedness of everything. Systems thinking, holism, going deeper down the spiral, knowing. So as we wrap up this first part of this 2-part series on what freshmen at elite colleges should really be seeking, and recently tenured professors, is a metaphor, which I want to leave you with. I want you to imagine your college journey is like unfolding an origami piece to find a diamond at the center. And most people believe that the unfolding of the origami piece they follow that as finding the diamond at the center. And they don't think the diamond is there until they get to the center, right? Maybe they're a little less aware than what we've talked about in this video. They try and unfold the origami piece Maybe they're not even aware of the origami piece at all. But the ones that are a little more aware, they can see the origami pieces there. They start unfolding it using a little bit lower on the spiral knowing, using some understanding, some remembering, some application, maybe some analysis if they're lucky. And then the ones that are a little more aware, they evaluate, they create. The ones that are really aware, they unfold this origami piece. They start inquiring and experiencing. And new shapes come out as they're unfolding the piece. The piece no longer looks like it was before. Their self is changing as they're changing the origami piece. And they keep searching for that diamond at the center. Where's the diamond? Where's the diamond? And if they go really deep, like I have, I still am, they go through all the loneliness and the suffering and the questioning of if they're taking the right path, the breaking down of every single belief and questioning of every single social norm and whatnot that they've ever been. And at some point, they keep unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. And then they realize there was no diamond at the center of the piece. The entire origami paper is made out of diamonds.